Hello and welcome to this edition of Crossover. I'm Ji Xiaojun with Wang Kuo.
Hi there.
And David.
Hi.
Good to see you again.
Thanks.
Now, Wang Kuo, you have different IDs in Crossover. It really depends on what topic we're going to talk about. And today you're a social worker, you're a trainer, but today you're a return scholar.
Return scholar.
You studied in America for how many years?
For about 4 years.
For about 4 years. And when did you come back to China?
I came back over 10 years, at the end of 2002.
Right.
So that's about 10 years ago.
That was a bit unusual because in those years, in 2002, many of the students who studied in America especially would choose to stay, actually, in
Most
America.
of them, yes.
According to a document released by the Ministry of Education in 2012, actually, there is a new trend going on. More students studying abroad are now coming back. And there seems to be, how shall we describe it, a breaking even point, because more students are coming back the proportion is different compared to the students going out to study. In 2012, the total number of return scholars, it's over 270,000.
Yeah.
And in 2005, nearly 90% of the students who's got the PhD degree in America would stay. While in 2011, it's been down to 82%. And in 2012, 70% of the students studying abroad would come back to China.
Right. Even those with higher degrees.
Exactly.
Even those higher degrees. Yeah. Well, that's a good trend. I think the flow is coming back, definitely, and because of the opportunities and because of the work environment, it's just getting better and better for those who have already got their overseas education, who has broadened their mind, and they came back with an international perspective, and that's good for them. It's good. You know, and
what was your reason? Why did you make that decision?
Yeah, that was one of the reasons why I came back. And I think 10 years ago, there were not as many people coming back to China as today. But then again, I realized that China has been developing real fast over the years, and it's proven that more and more people are coming back, and they share the same view, obviously, as I did. And I came back for better opportunities because I still do believe that I can play my potential to a larger degree back in China. I'm bilingual with international experience, and coming back to China, I think I have a much better role to play.
True.
And also, I need to take care of my family too. So that's
family reasons. Yeah,
family reasons too.
Well, and also, as China is going up economically, GDP is still going up, and the U.S. has been going this way.
Kind of.
So I think that's another reason too. As those two meet, then you get a lot more people that are starting to reconsider. As the job market is not so good in the U.S. Really,
it's not.
either.
Yeah. A lot of the foreigners are coming to China for opportunities.
Yeah, tell me about it.
Yeah.
I teach at an overseas program, and a lot of my students are American college, soon-to-be college graduates. And believe me, they start contacting me when they get close to graduation. They say, "Is there a job for me in China? Yeah, let me know. Write me a letter of recommendation." Or, in my email inbox, as summer approaches, they say, "I need a summer job in Beijing."
Right.
So not just the Chinese come back, the Americans are coming here too.
Yeah.
Right.
And I guess 10 years ago, it was easy. Well, it was easier to get a job back in the U.S. or maybe European countries. But nowadays, with the financial crisis and everything, the economy in the U.S. and European countries are, kind of going down. So the locals can't even get a job.
Yeah.
So that makes...
I guess the picture was very much different, say, 20, 30 years ago, because China started to adopt that new policy of encouraging Chinese students to study abroad and free come, free go.
Yeah.
That's how they described it in the time, because I used to work for the Ministry of Education for about 7 years, and that's how we describe it. The whole thing was initiated by Deng Xiaoping, actually, at the time.
Exactly.
At the end of the 70s, and that was the policy taken by the Chinese government, because at the time, there was no guarantee, and it was not required by the country, by the government, that you had to come back.
Right.
It's actually the government encouraged you to study abroad, but it's up to you to come back to China or to stay in that country for a few more years or permanently. That's the policy taken by the government at the time. But later on, the Ministry of Education introduced this new policy, say you have to sign a contract, and that's only understandable if you got the support from the government.
From the government,
and
sponsor.
you have the duty actually to come back to contribute a few years to your motherland, and that's how they deal with it. Otherwise, you have to pay for yourselves, actually.
Because they had what we call, the term we use is brain drain.
Brain drain, yeah.
The brain drain.
Exactly.
And in the 80s, because a lot of people, you know, they would, well, first of all, it was not that easy to get out of China back then.
No.
Because and especially in America, I remember just the getting through the pass of going through the American embassy and getting permission to go there on a student visa or whatever
visa
was unbelievably difficult.
It was unbelievable, yeah.
Unbelievable. Yeah. I mean, so many people just in tears coming out of the American embassy every day, because even if you had, you know, all of your papers intact and you had even a scholarship, the American embassy could just deny you for almost any reason.
For no reason. I was a perfect example. My first visa application was just turned down for no reason.
Yeah.
I just went in there and you know, I had the full documents. I had a scholarship, full scholarship, everything.
Mm-hmm.
And the visa officer asked me, "Are you coming back?" I said yes, but he said, "I don't believe you, so you're out."
Yeah.
And that's just how I was turned down.
For any
I was
reason.
lucky. I got it the second time, but then I heard there's this one person that was turned down 17 times before eventually getting a visa. That was, but that was back in the 90s, and I think nowadays it's so much more
easier.
much easier.
Yeah.
But when we talk about studying abroad, we do not only mean going to America, and we're talking about all these possible destination countries in Britain, in Europe, and
Australia.
All these different countries, in Africa, in South America. Chinese students can be seen anywhere, but America certainly is one of the biggest countries where we see the largest number of Chinese students. So in those years, say not to mention in the 70s, but you know, in the 80s, even in early 90s, the contrast was obvious, and China was still in the stage where everything was developing, but not yet to a certain level. While in America and in Europe and all these, you know, developed countries, things were totally different, and that's why it was an easy decision, well, kind of an easy decision for lots of the students studying abroad. They would choose to stay, and they would work hard there, and they would work hard to bring their families later on to join them in those countries, and that's how things were done back in those days.
For sure.
And they have every reason and right to do so, but things obviously were changing later on in the late 90s and in the 21st century.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. A lot of my friends, actually, they chose to stay in the U.S. When I went back to the U.S. Last Christmas, I was able to visit some of them, and they all have a stable job, a few kids already. And obviously, the lifestyle was very stable, very quiet, laid back, not so intense, not so stressful like back in China. But they all asked me what kind of opportunities they can possibly get if they choose to come back to China, because they still, you know, and especially for men, I think everybody is deep in their heart, they're still looking for that opportunity, that in a career, maybe they have a breakthrough in their career in some way, somehow, at some point. They just can't really get that in the U.S. I mean, they're living a pretty comfortable life. They have a house, have a car, a few kids already, but there's always something missing in there. And I knew a guy. He came back. He's in his 50s. He used to work for Microsoft. He came back a few years back, and I had a chance to meet with him. He loved music, but he has been working as an engineer in the U.S. for the past like 20, 30 years. And all of a sudden, he feels like, you know, I've made enough money. I have a great house, a few cars, I have a few kids. Something's missing. I want to be a musician. I want
American Idol.
X Factor. Well, X Factor. Yeah, exactly. You know, I don't know if he tried that out, but he wanted to come back to China and maybe start a music studio and maybe go into music. He was still kind of trying to pursue that dream, but it was tough. It was tough.
Yeah.
He has lost touch with China for so long. It's tough for him to get back in the game.
That's one thing when you first they want to go to America and make a better life and earn lots of money.
Right.
But you know, as they get older and they get, you know, established, you still miss the culture. You miss the food.
Right.
You miss the
You miss the connection.
Yeah, yeah. And then you start thinking, isn't there some way I can combine these two?
Right.
And very often you go to some of these families where they immigrate and they bring the parents along with them, or some of the family, they immigrate. You go there, they just create a little Chinese environment in their home. They're
Right.
watching Chinese satellite TV.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, eating Chinese food.
Hang out with Chinese friends.
Hang out
Hang
with
out with Chinese
friends,
friends,
going
yes.
to Chinese groceries,
Right.
like with in LA and San Francisco. So that some people say, why not just go back to China? That's what we really want anyway.
Right.
So.
Things are obviously changing on both ends, actually, in America or in Europe, in those destination countries, but at the same time, lots are happening in China as well, and the government and some universities, they've also taken their initiatives to try to attract more talents coming back to work in China. We'll talk about that after a short break. You're watching Crossover. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Crossover. And now, talking about these Chinese scholars or Chinese students studying abroad, I mean, the government at the time, the Chinese government, they had their concerns. They've been working very hard to try to attract more Chinese scholars to come back to China. But how? How can you do so? I mean, obviously, the lifestyles could be different, and the working environment could be different, and you need to attract them to come back to work in China. Well, I mean, to be a patriot, and patriotism is one thing, but, you know, obviously there's more.
You gotta have this ready. You gotta have the opportunity. I think it's gotta be a system in place to attract the talents to come back to China. You can't just say, well, you love the country, you're Chinese, you gotta come back for the culture, or
that's a very important part of it. But
that's an important part.
Exactly.
But I remember back then, I think about the time you said you came back, 2002, I remember people talking about this, and they said there was a kind of a contradiction between, they wanted to attract, you know, what they called them, you know, haigui, returning turtles.
Returning turtles, right. Sea turtles.
Right, sea turtles, right. Because the companies want to attract them, but that means they have to give them these extra perks, you know, maybe some tax breaks or maybe some special compensation. They get to take a longer vacation or go back to the U.S. or something like that. But then they begin to discover, you know, that actually some of these returning turtles, you know, were kind of turtle eggs. They were not that good. I mean, and they were not really worth the company. Yeah, they may have had some experience overseas, but they could get almost as good, you know, because the job market was very intense. You get very talented people here in China. So as I remember during that time, they were sort of having second thoughts about these incentives for the overseas Chinese to come back, because it really wasn't financially working out all that great. Because they used to think, oh, you know, like you say, I'm bilingual now. I've got great English. I've got training. But very often they'd come back and they actually would not fit in very well to the Chinese business world because they were used to the American system. So they'd come here and they really couldn't function very well. And so people were saying, you know, maybe we don't really need returning people. We just need people who are trained to understand this system. We need better personnel that are trained here in China. Is that true?
That was my experience. I came back with 2 master's degrees.
You were one of those eggs.
Oh, I was one of those eggs. Ready to grow, but not fully grown yet. You know, I thought I came back with 2 master's degrees. You know, I speak great English, and I had international experience, and you know, I'm about to take China by storm. But then again, I couldn't find a job. I sent out like a few hundred resumes. I couldn't land on a job for like a few months.
All right.
I think back then, I think back in the 90s, if you came back as a sea turtle or came back from overseas with the advanced degree, I think you were much more welcome. Almost guaranteed. Almost guaranteed. But things changed even before, even when I came back, even 10 years ago. That's already changed dramatically. Sea turtle is not a shiny title anymore. It doesn't really mean anything. And plus, the employers get more and more practical. They just want people who have the qualifications, who have the experience to work for them effectively. Whoever performs well at the position, at their job, will be hired.
Actually, there was a moment when all these high school, you know, institutions, they've adopted this new policy, and there is even one called 10,000 people plan. And basically, they're saying in 5 to 10 years' time, they've introduced this, you know, new incentives, new policies, trying to attract the real sea turtles come back to China to work for these different institutions, and it worked very well. And a lot of real sea turtles, not the eggs.
I like that. Yeah, not the eggs.
Were attracted actually back to work, you know, as the professors, scholars.
for sure.
in these universities.
For sure. I'm glad you mentioned the word real sea turtles, because there are all kinds of sea turtles, all kinds of returnees. The plan, I think, was meant to attract those with more experience, with key technology, with critical technology achievement or innovation, and also those who probably had money, who can make an investment in China. I think those were the people the Chinese government welcomes. For those and who just came back with fresh out of college or fresh out of a master's degree or PhD.
I guess we're talking about two different groups.
Two different,
of people.
definitely.
These
different.
young,
and plus, I mean,
fresh graduates, and all
definitely.
those established scholars and professors are two different types of people.
Exactly, two types. And one group may be much more experienced and much more accomplished than the other, and that's the more favorable group. That's for sure. And also for the other group, and also depends on which country they come from, what kind of background they had.
Yeah.
You know, what major, what field did they study in the country.
And there's
So
also one
that
major
matters.
factor, say, in the 90s, because China was not that well connected with the rest of the world. So basically, you didn't have the information to judge whether these ones were the real turtles, or basically they were only claiming they were the real sea turtles.
Right.
But these days, it seems China is pretty much so closely connected with the whole world. So you have all this information, and when you claim you're the sea turtle, we can actually check it, check your background.
Yeah.
So that's when we are more in the better position to check out this real sea turtle.
Or that people know a lot more. So I
Yes.
mean, you say, I'm coming back from the U.S. and I've got my degree from the University of North Carolina Polytechnic or something or other. So there's a great university, and people now know. No,
it's not.
That's not a great university.
It's a community college.
Back then, nobody knew. I mean,
Right.
they really do. It could be a community college. Nobody knew, and now you just get online. You can take a look. See, this is not a great university.
Yeah,
So.
and there was also a period when many organizations were only trying to be international for the sake of being international.
Right.
So to just borrow a few foreign faces was what they were trying to do, not the real talent, and that was a major difference in those years.
I think it's happened a lot before. It's still happening today. But then again, I think, like I said, I think a lot of the employers are getting more and more pragmatic. They just want quality people. And plus, even if you come back from Harvard, you still have to prove to the employer that you deserve that title, that you can perform well in our job. Yeah. And other than that, because...
Now, we're going to take a break, but when we come back, we are going to talk about the possible frustrations they might come across if they stay in those destination countries, in those foreign countries. What are the frustrations they might have? And that's also one of the reasons helping them make that decision to come back to China. You're watching Crossover. Welcome back to Crossover. And today we're talking about Chinese scholars more Chinese students studying abroad or working, living in other countries, decide to come back to China, to settle down in China. And there are some obvious reasons, family reasons, economy reasons, but there are also some other reasons, some practical reasons, or the difficulties, challenges they might come across in those countries where they live and work now. What are the reasons that come to you? And there is one possible reason, because they grew up in China, and then they studied and they worked in that country. So that cultural recognition could be one thing.
Could be one thing, yeah. Well, I think a lot of the Chinese people had difficulty trying to fit in. They wanna fit in the mainstream American culture, and I think a lot of them eventually got disappointed because it was much more challenging than they thought, language-wise, culture-wise, and also work-wise. Even if they get a job and they probably don't understand the jokes, don't understand the games that people play in there.
Even after a few years they stayed in there.
Oh, even if.
Oh, sure.
I had I had a hard time trying to understand, because I was working with all kinds of people from all walks of life, speaking different accents, different cultural backgrounds, different family issues. I had a tough time trying to make sure that I was able to handle that very well, and also deal with the colleagues, deal with the organization structure. That was tough. That was very tough. So I think for me, because for me, I thought I was pretty good. I was able to speak the language well. I had very good communication skills. But for me, I still had a tremendous amount of difficulties trying to fit in. And just to imagine those students who were engineering students, who were computer science students, chemistry students, and they're not so capable of the language skills, and they sit in the lab every day.
Yeah.
And it's going to be extra hard for them to deal with, you know.
I've talked to some people back in the U.S. who are some of them still there, but there's a common complaint among some of them, which is there's this kind of a glass ceiling.
Glass ceiling, yeah.
Because certainly in certain fields, such as law,
Oh,
or even medicine.
Business.
You know, one is a dentist, you know, and they said there's, you know, you can attract a certain amount of customers in whatever field you happen to be in, or you can have a certain amount of success, but there's a certain level at which Americans will feel uncomfortable if it's not a local American, you know. I mean,
right.
If your language isn't exactly perfect, or you don't have a certain chance for career advancement to the top level in a company
right.
because of this corporate culture. You know, you may be good at a low level, you're real productive, and we like to have you here.
Right.
But if we want you in at the very top echelon, they have to feel comfortable with you, and they'll never feel really comfortable with a foreigner.
Culture-wise, language-wise, and everything.
Which is, you could call it prejudice or discrimination. But on the other hand, all those things are like what we call them old boy networks.
Yeah.
It has to be people that you feel comfortable going out with a drink with. And no matter how good your English is, it's not going to be like a native speaker. No. And so they find they can rise to a certain level, and then they just stay there. Yeah. And so they begin to think, I've done the best I can do here. I had hopes to make it, you know, really big, but maybe I should go back to China where I can be fully fledged, you know, powerhouse performer in the economy. People will respect me. So I hear that a lot. I don't know if you ever.
Oh, definitely. Actually, even in foreign companies here in China, you hear that a lot.
Yeah.
Because most of the the multinationals. Yeah. Okay. Because most of the CEOs or CFOs are foreigners. Yeah. From America, from European countries. And if you look at the middle management, they probably come from like Singapore, like Taiwan, Hong Kong. And then if you look at the staff, most of them are like, you know, mainland.
There's another reason, though, too, which is around, I think it was around that time, 2000,
2001.
2001. A lot of multinationals begin to do what's called localization.
Right.
So they used to hire a lot of foreign expats and give them a very expensive package. And then around the 1998, 1999, 2000, they started localizing because it wasn't economically productive. They found that they could use locals and would do better, or actually, you know, maybe much better than the expat hires. And so right at that time also is when a lot of these big jobs with multinational corporations began to open up.
Right.
And so the returning sea turtles would say, hey, now I can go for this middle management job at Motorola or something, because now they're hiring locals.
Right. What about the other issues, say, because people always complain about the network, say, everything, whatever you do, you have to find someone you know. Right. Because that's, you know, everything is about this networking, say, culture in China. All these connections are necessary. And they would hope that in a different country in the West, maybe you wouldn't have to find all the connections, and you basically only need to focus on how on your work, and then just focus on how well you do it.
They thought.
Yeah. And that's why, I mean, later on they discovered, hey, it seems there was also a network existing here, especially in the financial world. If you're not connected with someone else, maybe you are not given that opportunity to develop further in your career. And that's so. I mean, all these networks.
Yeah, I mean, all you can say is there's a certain tendency in the U.S. to be somewhat less that way. I mean, it's not totally untrue, but as Wang Kuo was saying, it's an exaggeration to say that the U.S. is totally neutral. You know, that the only advance on the basis of your qualifications. Nah, you need network. You need the network.
You need the network.
Yeah,
and that's part of the MBA program. You know, I was studying the MBA program too.
Or Ivy League.
It's always encouraged that you go and network with your classmates, with the employers, and go out to some seminars or whatever. Try to get to know more people in your area, maybe some other areas. It's always encouraged.
But at the same time, they're also complaining about the lack of a different network and basically their social life, because, you know, you know, the cultural differences, you live different lifestyles. Sometimes you would say they choose to have that Chinese environment, and sometimes it's actually they were forced to do so because they basically didn't have a choice, and then they have to hang out with their Chinese friends.
Well, you don't have a choice if you want to hang out. If you want to network with those people, you have to hang out with them. And network means you hang out with these people. You get to know them. That's what a network is all about. So you got to spend the time. But I think a lot of the Chinese people probably have have a tough time, being able to speak the language, understanding the culture. And, I had a tough time because a lot of Americans talk about different sports. They talk about football, they talk about baseball, and I have no idea.
You talk about ping pong?
I can talk about ping pong. They can't relate to that, right? So, we talk about different things, and it's hard.
That's why I came to China, because I don't know about football either.
You know ping pong, right?
You knew about ping pong, right?
I never understand football.
It was tough.
Teams,
you can't even participate in the conversation. And how do you network? You can't even.
That's true. You sit in a bar with these people, and very often they start talking about baseball teams,
they talk
football
about
teams,
and they talk about all these celebrities who have no idea. They talk about movies and TV shows, and they talk about The Simpsons.
Yeah.
We're like, well, who is?
Pay more attention to paparazzi reports.
Yeah.
So the thing is, a lot of people, probably I would guess Wang Kuo was also liked Western culture, American culture. That's one of the reasons you were attracted to it. But a lot of Chinese that I know went there just to economically better themselves. They really didn't care all that much about American culture.
I agree with that. Yeah.
So after a certain point, you feel like, I've reached a certain point. I really just miss Chinese culture, and they want to come back.
Right.
And then there's also, you reach a certain age, and maybe you've built your career, and now you're in your mid-40s or something, and your parents start to get older, and your relatives start to get older.
Exactly.
Now you start thinking, what am I going to do about my mother and father? When you're in your 20s, you don't worry about it. But when you're 30 and 40, now your mother and dad start getting sick, and you think, maybe I should go back and take care of them, and that's another thing.
And there's also the moment they start to think about finding the other half. In a different cultures, sometimes it could be difficult for them to get even that relationship.
Well, that would be for the younger, like the 30 or something. They start to think.
Possibly that's one of the reasons you decide to come back.
Exactly.
Right,
There's just more choices. Let me just put it that way.
You should have let me know. I could have introduced you to some American women.
How sweet is that? That would be great.
It's too late.
Now you say that, right?
Yeah.
Remember there's a very famous dating program in China on China
The dating
TV.
program, that's one.
Exactly, and they've organized all these special editions for the young Chinese living in America, in the UK, in Australia,
overseas,
in Japan,
exactly.
in Korea. I don't know. All these different countries. That shows how difficult it is.